Hey everyone, I'm Mike Sattel. Welcome to our first SAT class of 8. I am going to be your teacher for this class, for all of the classes to come. And trust me, you are in good hands. I have been an SAT tutor since 2006. I have done it all. I've taught SAT classes online, in person. I've done private tutoring. I've taken the SAT more times than I care to remember. I most recently took the June SAT, so I've got lots of experience with the actual test. And many of you might even have seen some of my YouTube videos. I've got a pretty big channel all dedicated to SAT stuff. So you are in very good hands. We're going to talk about different things in each class. I've got a whole lesson plan for us. But basically, it's going to be supplemented by what you guys are doing on your own in the SAT portal. And I'll show you that in a second. But let's make sure everyone is logged in. And then we can get started on some questions that I've written for you guys and hit some major strategies to start off our prep. Hello, everyone. We're a little early. Hello, Liam. Nice to finally meet you.
You too. Nice to meet you.
If you guys can see my screen, we still got a couple minutes, but if you click the My Screen tab at the top, I want you guys to get into this page. This is the portal that you got a separate login for. And when you get there, there's this button, Satellovision for Class. That is what we're going to be using. So you can go ahead and click that. It shouldn't show anything quite yet, but I'm going to put on a very hard question. And that we can occupy ourselves with for a couple minutes. Don't panic. They're not all going to be this crazy, but if you've got some ideas, feel free to try them. And so eventually you should get to something that looks like this. This is the question. And if you want the scratch paper, you've got it. Basically, what we're going to do is use that so that you guys can interact with these questions as we go. This is, like I said, a very hard one. So no pressure to get this right away. We'll do some easier ones too. If you guys don't want to put on your screens, that's fine. If you do, that's fine. Whatever you're more comfortable with. If you have a question or something, put it in the chat because that's going to be on top of my screen. And feel free to ask questions. I've got a lot planned for us, but don't hesitate if something isn't clicking. This crazy question, work on a little bit, but we're going to come back to it. If you have an answer, you can click and you can enter it here. This is a little different from how the main student-produced response works in the Blue Book app on the actual SAT, but that's just a programming thing. And these scratch papers you can feel free to use as well, or just having a paper is fine. So where do we get the questions from? This particular question I wrote. So it's based on other SAT questions that I've seen over the many, many years of doing this. I'll give it another sec. You guys, again, can work on this if you have any ideas. If you have no ideas, that's okay. Like I said, crazy hard question. The homepage of this portal, this Satellovision for Class, that's what we're going to be doing during these Zoom sessions. This is where I'm going to let you guys interact with the questions. So it's a very similar format to the actual SAT. You'll see I've put some homework things here that you can follow. This is just meant to supplement the other portal. The best way to get in touch with me and the most immediate is through this. Go through the tabs here really quick, and then we'll swap out the question and start talking about some strategies. The main buttons at the top are pretty much everything you'll need. Like I said, this is Satellovision for Class. That's getting you to the page here where you have the access to the question. And if you click the scores button, you will have the ability to enter scores that you get. So two kinds of scores: Blue Book practice test scores. These have, there's pretty clear instructions about how to enter those. And then official scores, which are much easier to enter. So you can just choose, okay, I took the May SAT. That was on May 3rd or something. I got a 610 and a 590. And then those knowledge and skills things, 6, 7, 5, 5, 5, 7, 6, 6. And submit. And there you go. Any past scores are there. And this is helpful for me. So maybe make it a point to do this sometime this week. I'll remind you guys in the homework as well to do that. But it'd be cool for me to see your scores. And then you can have the full score report for any past scores, just so I have a sense of where you guys are starting from. And once you have practice tests as well, like I said, those will go in and we get much more detailed results about those. Those are really, really useful for just keeping track of your progress. But don't feel compelled to do a practice test if you haven't done one in Blue Book. We don't need one right away. We'll learn some things first before we get into that. That'll happen during our third class. We'll talk more about that. If you have questions about that page, let me know, but that should be pretty straightforward. And the main page is going to be this practice one. This is where a lot of good stuff happens. And there's going to be basically all these different exercises and things like that. So these tabs right here coincide with our classes. There you can see there's 10 steps in this study plan. There are also 8 classes, so we are going to double up when we get to some of the practice tests. But this is probably the easiest way to organize your practice. And we are going to do some work today on the strategies for the main parts of the sections. You can see here there's a lot of good exercises that you can work on. There's some easy quizzes at the beginning. There's some specific strategy exercises, and each one of those is going to let you answer questions the same way we're going to do tonight. So basically, the strategies part is what we start off with, because that's the most important piece of the SAT. We've got to be able to change the strategies we use to change the scores that we want to get. So this is basically what you, almost like a checklist that you want to make sure you accomplish each week. You can work on each week's lessons a little bit before our class. You can do a little bit after. I'm not expecting you to have completed everything beforehand, but basically every week you want to be working through one of these. And again, I'll post that in the portal, kind of somewhere here, and then also in the other portal as well, so that it's in multiple places. So it's just a really great way to stay organized. And we are going to talk about things like dumb summaries today. And so when you make an exercise, you'll see most of them have a video at the beginning that you can watch. I highly recommend watching the video before you start the lesson, because I go into specifics, especially for the strategies, where I want you to change the way you're thinking about things. So it's really important that you're answering these 10 questions using the stuff that I talk about in the video. So really, really great. And then for each of these questions, when you get to it, not to spoil it, but this is not such a bad one, if you get it right or wrong, a little video appears going over it. And so that's really, really important, is that you also learn from mistakes right away. Don't just look at it and be like, okay, I get it. The correct answer is whatever. You want to make sure that you're learning what you could do differently to get it right. And there's a little analysis here about what might be going wrong in your answering, right? So any questions so far? You can feel free to chat them or unmute if it's easier. That's fine. I do want to show you one other thing. Okay, so if I go back to this, you'll see at the bottom of this particular checklist, there's this bookmarks quiz. I highly recommend everyone do this. Okay, as you can see, watch the video, important instruction. And that's because the bookmarks are part of the way we want to think about this test, right? So if you're trying to prepare for the SAT, obviously you're going to do some practice questions. You're going to get some of them wrong, but you're also going to get some of them right by accident. And that's an opportunity to learn something new. So I'm a real stickler for this. We want to basically use this button right here, this mark for review button, to indicate when we are not sure of an answer. And that video at the beginning will explain this in much more detail, but we are going to use this tonight. I'll talk about it as we go through some questions. Basically, we want to make sure that if we get something right by accident, we still review it with some video like I've got for most questions, or you ask me if you're confused, you can chat me about a question. But that's a great way to basically double the amount of practice you're getting. It's not just about right and wrong. If we're only thinking about things being right and wrong, we are missing another dimension to the SAT, is how sure were we? Did we do it efficiently? Did we use a strategy that's going to make us better in all sorts of places? So this bookmark thing, really, really important for improving our scores. We want to make sure we're taking advantage of all those opportunities to learn. So you will hear me be a pain in the neck about that. And that brings us back to this question, where most of you, even if you get an answer, are probably hitting this mark for review button. And you can do that even on the questions that we work on this portal here. And I have all your answers here, so I know when you guys are struggling, getting something right, getting something wrong, so I can keep track of everyone. But this would be a good example where if by now you don't really have any clue what's going on, you can bookmark it. So that way, even if you happen to guess randomly correct here, you can make sure you go back. But I want to make sure you guys also know that it's not going to be this hard every single question. We are going to cover a wide variety. So let's back up a little bit. I know some of you might still be working on this one, but let's do a little something different. Let's back up and do a slightly easier question. Take a look at this one. There are a couple ways to do it. And we are starting with math because I think that's where we have both the best advantage because you've probably all learned all the math you need for the SAT from school. If you've taken Algebra 2, you're good. You know everything. But we also learn things in school maybe in ways that are different from the way that we want to solve things on the SAT. So feel free to give this one a shot, and then I'll talk about my method here. But as soon as I see this question, I know exactly how I'm going to solve it. Even before I really read it, I've got a plan. So give it a try, and you can interact with this. If you want to cross out answer choices, you can do that like this. You can choose it. You can mark it for review, all that good stuff. All right, cool. I'm seeing some answers here. I'm seeing some crossouts. That's good. That's good. And I promise you, you don't really need to know anything about parabolas to get this right. I know that that word is important in the question, but you don't really need to know anything about it. Give it another couple seconds, and then I'll start talking more about my solution here. Perfect. That works so well. And if anyone knows what PPIE stands for, feel free to let me know. I'm curious if anyone's done anything about their math strategies yet, for either from my portal or from YouTube or anything like that. There it is. Yes, Liam, plug points into equations. So I'll write that out. Because what we're talking about tonight is not individual things that are going to help on one or two questions. We are talking about strategies that are near universal, that are going to make a difference on all sorts of questions, a wide variety of questions, things that we can almost use as a mantra as we go through the SAT. And literally every time I see any math question on the SAT, I'm asking myself the same thing. Do I have points? Do I have equations? Because my main math strategy is to plug points into equations. And I don't care if you're in AP calculus or whatever, and you know everything you need to know, you're the top of your math class. There are going to be times when if you do things the traditional way that your teachers show you in school, you're just going to be inefficient or you're just going to waste brain power. One good thing about plug points into equations is it's very mindless. And I see just here right off the bat, if I look at this question without even reading it, I see two things. I've got points, I've got equations. So my brain just quickly goes to that. And I'm curious how many of you just naturally did that, because that is absolutely the way I would handle this, because I want to do something that's pretty mindless. And especially since one of the points is 139, well, that's a pretty nice set of numbers to work with. At least the one is. Because if I start plugging that in, I don't even really need a calculator to help me, right? So I can ignore the y really, but 1/2 of 1 minus 5 times 1 minus 12. Now, I wouldn't write this on my scratch paper if I was doing an SAT, because that I can probably do in my head, but I would write maybe this, 1/2 of -4 times -11, right? I would do the little bit of math, and okay, 1/2 of -4 is -2. -2 times -11 is 22. But I need it to be 39, so I know that that point does not work in that equation. So boom, that choice is gone. And then I'm just going to go down the line. And again, if you have questions, if I'm going too fast, if anything is unsure, just feel free to give me a chat. I can see it all going down in the chat. So that helps me out. So 1/2 of 1 plus 5 is 6. 1 plus 12 is 13. Well, 3 times 13, right? Because 1/2 of 6 is 3, is 39. So that looks pretty good. But I can't stop there. I got to go all the way through, because you never know. Sometimes multiple choices might work, but this is okay. -3 times 3 times -11. Well, that's what, 99? Am I doing that right? Certainly not right there, though. So that gets rid of another choice. Get rid of that. And then finally, D, -3. 1 minus 2 is -1. And 1 plus 12 is 13. So this doesn't surprise me. Again, we have 3 times 13 is 39. So two choices work. That's very common with this strategy. Sometimes we get lucky, and sometimes we plug a point in, we're just done. Only one answer will work, and that's that. But in this case, we got to do something else, but that's okay, because, well, they give us a second point, right? So let's just do that. Let's do the other point here. Let's squeeze it in. -5, 147. Here's where I might start to go towards my calculator, but at the same time, have some confidence, because -5 plus 5 is 0. So this whole thing is a 0, which means everything is 0. So that doesn't seem right. And then, oh no, My pen doesn't work all the way down. D. Let's just double check, make sure, can't hurt. -3 times -5 minus 2 is -7. -5 plus 12 is +7. And finally, I'm going to reach for the calculator because -49 times 3, -3 I can't do in my head, but luckily my calculator can do it for me, and it's 147, confirming that choice D is the answer. So let's see. It should pop up for you guys that you either got it right or wrong. So hopefully, yeah, like I see the question, Amin, good question. I'll get that in a second. But hopefully you can get in the habit of spotting points and equations really, really quickly. Before I get to the other solution, Amin, that you're suggesting, the thing that the College Board would probably tell us to do here is use the fact that this is a vertex to our advantage. A vertex, remember, is if we have a parabola, it's the point at the bottom. And one thing that's always true about a vertex is it's halfway between the x-intercepts. The way that these equations are formatted in the choices, they're giving us the x-intercepts. So the College Board explanation might be very conceptual. They want us to look and say, okay, what's the average of the two x-intercepts in these choices? It's supposed to be -5. And we can see in choice D that happens. -2 plus 12 is -10. Divide that by 2, you get -5. So it works out. And maybe we'd have to check out the other point as well. But to me, that's a lot of very, very specific knowledge that we need in order to solve this question, when instead, plug points into equations doesn't really require any knowledge to solve it. It's just plug them in, let the numbers or the calculator do the work for you. Now, speaking of that, Amin's question is, could you solve this with Desmos, with the table of values? Yes, you can. There's going to be some complicated things we can do with Desmos using a regression, but the problem, I'll even just show you quick. Let me just make sure, can we see the Desmos? Good. There are ways, we're not really going to get too into this today, but there are ways to take points, and there's a lesson on this in my website, so it's there. This is called a regression, and you can use an equation, in this case a quadratic, to make the equation, right? Based on the points. Basically, it's going to plot those points for you and just tell you automatically what the equation is. The problem is these default things here give us a very specific type of quadratic equation, right? It's the standard form. And these numbers do not look like the numbers we were given in this. So in order to do that regression, we'd have to completely change the equation. You can learn how to do that, but I think that that's messy. Another way we could have used the calculator here is just to try every answer choice by typing it out and seeing which one gives us the right stuff. So if I did choice A, for example, 1/2 x minus 5 times x minus 12, I see my vertex is not what they say it is, right? Vertexes are clickable points. So if I did the right answer, -3 times x minus 2 times x plus 12, I don't know why it's red as well, but that's this one. Here it is. Look at how much I got to scroll to get that vertex, because it's, oh, and the colors are different. Oh, see here, I'll change it for you. Purple. There it is. We can see it does have the right vertex. So we could do that. We could graph it and verify, but my thing with Desmos and the SAT is a lot of times it ends up just being a lot of time wasted typing things when a little bit of mental math is easier. So, you'll get better at using the calculator in the right moments, using your mental math in the other right moments, and using strategies versus using traditional math. That's stuff that comes with practice. But I want to stress for now is try to break old habits. Try to get away from the more traditional math that you learn in school. Try not to think about this question as about parabolas. Open up the possibility that this kind of simple strategy would work. And if you're not sure if a strategy like this is going to work, well, just try it anyway and let it fail. Because through those failures, you'll also learn, okay, this is a time I can use the strategy. This is a situation I can't. So at the beginning stage of SAT prep, you want to focus on getting a lot of questions right. That's everyone's goal is I want to improve my score. I want to get more questions right. But my advice is don't worry about that for now. Don't focus on speed. Don't focus on accuracy. focus on taking chances on new habits, new ways of doing things, because once you get used to those new habits, you're going to have a much better time improving your score because you'll be answering questions in different ways. You'll be avoiding traps and things like that. And to bring it back, you'll have a much better chance at the crazy stuff like this. Because, again, this looks crazy. How many of you even have submitted an answer? One. So let's see if we can do it. I'll help you with this one, but notice if you want, you can see we have, thinking about our plug points into equations again, we have what we want. Do we have points? Do we have equations? We definitely have equations, right? There's a big one right there in the top. So I see that right away. My brain's already going there. Now, do I have points? The answer is yes. They gave us points in two ways that are a little bit more subtle than the last question. K is the y-intercept. Well, that's a point. A y-intercept, that's a specific point. Every graph or most graphs have a y-intercept. So that's a point. That's the point 0, k, right? Every y-intercept has an x coordinate of 0. That's really good because 0 is also a nice number. So that's helpful. Plus this other thing here, this is also a point. It looks insane, but it's function notation. Function notation gives us an x and a y. And yeah, the y is insane, but let's not worry about that. Let's trust the strategy. So 8/3 k minus 475 over 21. And someone did ask this before. Where's this question come from? All the questions we're going to do tonight, don't worry, I've written them all. I've been writing SAT questions for over a decade at least, writing them and teaching them twice as long. So I know what a question is going to do. But I don't want to spoil the questions that are both on my website and on the Blue Book practice test in the College Board resources. So don't worry, that's not going to happen. Everything we do is going to be new. But you'll see as you take more SAT practice questions, there's not a whole lot of new in the SAT. They tend to repeat themselves. So what I would do here is I just follow my instruction, plug points into equations. And another thing we'll learn as we start to adopt these strategies is laziness is really, really good. And I see of the 2 points that I've got, there's obviously one that's lazier, this one. So I'm going to start with that. Let's plug that in, right? So the k is the y, and that's going to go in place of the f of x. Then -5/7, k is, we don't know, but x is 0, and plus b. So it seems like there's a lot going on, but lucky for us, k to the 0 is equal to 1. And we need to remember that. We're going to see zeros and ones in lots of places on lots of math questions. We're going to use those numbers a lot. So we have to be comfortable with the properties of 0 and 1. And so anything, whether it's a letter or a number, anything raised to the 0 power is 1. Meaning that this is just k equals -5/7 plus b. Because 1 times -5/7 is -5/7. So I don't know what to do with that yet, but it's a little nicer than what we started with. It's a little simpler. So, okay, where do I go from there? I leave it aside and I try the other point and I see what happens. And let's change color for that so I don't get confused. So we're going to plug this point into this equation. So y goes in y, so that's going to be, oh boy, am I going to run out of space? 8/3 k minus 475 over 21 is equal to, that's my y coordinate, -5/7 k squared, right? Because 2 goes in for x, plus b. We're getting better. It might not feel like it, but we're getting better because now, if you know algebra, you know that in order to solve for k, which is what they want, we need to just have k's, because then we can solve whatever that equation is. It's a messy equation, but the problem right now isn't the k or the mess, it's the b. But I have a way of finding b, or at least making it go away. Because I have this equation here. If I get b alone, and this is probably, honestly, the hardest part of this, because this is the first time I have to think about something. Everything I did before that was just very robotic. I have points, I'm going to plug them into the equation. But now I get that k plus 5/7 is equal to b, and I can do a little substitution. So again, feel free to ask questions. I know this looks insane, but if I were doing this on the SAT, I'm thinking very, very little. I am just being a robot. I was told to plug points into equations. I did it. Now I've got a b that I want to get rid of. I'm plugging something in. So that's plus k plus 5/7. Now we've got what we want. An equation, which is one letter. There's a lot of k's, but there's just one type of letter. And we could solve this. We could move things around. We could combine like terms. It's a quadratic, so we're going to need to get it equal to 0, and then we'd have to factor. But here's where I wanted to show you another strategy that I think many of you will embrace quite quickly. Desmos does algebra for us. So let's move it over. So it's out of the way. And I'm going to type this in, right? So here, I'll type it in just as I wrote it, 8/3 k minus 475 over 21. Can I make this bigger? Yes, good. Equals negative 5/7 k squared plus k plus 5/7. And as I'm typing in Desmos, every time I type in Desmos, I'm always looking in two places because so many people lose points just typing in Desmos incorrectly. So you got to make sure, does it look good? 8/3 k minus 475 over 21 equals negative 5/7 k squared plus k plus 5/7. Looks good. But you can see we've got an error. Well, it doesn't like k because we're trying to graph something, right? It's Desmos. It's an XY plane. It doesn't know what to do with k, but it does know what to do with x's and y's. So all you got to do is swap all these k's for x's, and boom. What do we get? We get vertical lines, because what it's doing is it is solving that equation for you. All the algebra that your teacher would have made you do to solve this nightmare of a situation, Desmos just does it. And it graphs the answers, the values of x, as vertical lines. And lucky for us, we can tap the points where those lines touch the x-axis, so it's easy to see what the values are. Sometimes that won't happen, depending on what kind of equation you're giving it. That's fine. You can always just zoom in and see for yourself. But we've got two answers. Pick one. Put it in. Put it into the thing. I know most of you should be bookmarking because I can tell most of you didn't really know, but I'm curious. Of the two, how are we going to put it in? And some of you might still get it wrong, even though I'm telling you the answer is on the screen right now. But that's okay. I want to make a point about that. So give it a shot. Just the answer is right there on the screen. We want the value of k. These are giving us the values of k. All we did was switch it to an x, but otherwise these are still k's. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Ooh, is this going to work? Did it grade them? Yes. So some of you still got it wrong. So the answers here are listed 4.666, 4.667, 4.6667. And the reason is that all of those are equivalent to 14/3. So what gives? Why isn't -7 going to work? Well, let's go back to the question here. Ooh, I can do that. Yeah. Let's go back to the question. What does it say? The function f is defined above, where k and b are positive constants. So sometimes we do a lot of work on the SAT and they throw a little choice or a little word at us that makes all the difference. So yes, according to Desmos and all the math, -7 would be a valid value of k, but it's not positive. So it has to be positive. So that, if you got it wrong for that reason, no worries. That was the point, is I wanted to let you know that the SAT is doing that kind of mean thing, so that when you get those answers at the end, you feel like you've accomplished something, but there was one little piece at the beginning that you got to make sure you check. So in the same way that as I was entering in Desmos, I kept going back and double checking that I was entering everything right. Whenever I have an answer to a question, I always go back to the question itself and make sure I haven't given them something different from what they want. Do they want a positive constant? Does it need to be an integer? Are they asking for k? Are they asking for b? Are they asking for x or y? Basically, just be really careful. Radiuses and diameters. There's lots of places where they're expecting us to get confused and miss something obvious. The other issue, though, is if you do 14 thirds as a decimal, it does come out to 14.6 repeating. And we can see that kind of in Desmos, right? We can see 4.6 repeating, and we can see that it rounds at a certain point. And this is just a reminder that this free response question thing on the SAT is very finicky about how it accepts answers. If you're entering a decimal, or especially a repeating decimal, or a decimal is just like lots of spots, and they don't tell you to round it to a specific value, you have to go with as many spaces as the thing will take. So normally that means 5 characters. And so in this particular case, 4 is 1 character. The decimal counts. 666 is 5 characters. But we can also, instead of just ending there, we can round the last one. If you stop short, you're going to be wrong. It's annoying. I think that's a mean thing that the SAT does. It seems like they should just always specify what to round to. But my advice is actually, if you've solved something and you've figured out the fraction value, you're better off entering it as a fraction just to play it safe, especially if it's thirds, sixths, sevenths, something weird. Oof. Now look, this is not a question that most of you need to be like getting right away. But I wanted to make the point. At the end of the day, this question is very similar to the parabola one. We have this ability to think in a very dumb way about something that's very complex, and at least it gets the ball rolling. I wouldn't know what I'm doing if I saw this on the test. I don't look at this and instantly have a plan of how I'm going to solve it. I don't know all the steps. Now, I get 800s every time I take the SAT math. Reading, not so much, but math, I do. And it's just because I trust the process. I trust the strategies. I know that no matter what they're giving me, if it's points and equations, odds are very, very high that plugging those points into those equations is going to help. So my advice is, yeah, whether it's an easy question or a hard question, try to embrace that. And we can find that in all sorts of places. So let me give you another one. This one I think will be much easier. Is it loading? Oh, I gotta hit a different button. There we go. Working. Oh, sorry, I did a wrong thing. This is what I want to do. There we go. That's what I want. Right? Now, my advice here is no one should be doing algebra, right? Plug points into equations. Do we have equations? For sure. There's one right at the top. Do we have points? Well, we have answer choices. So give it a shot. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to look at it. And again, try not to solve it with algebra, even if you know how. I don't care. That's not impressive. I would also say don't use Desmos here. You don't need it. You can solve this. I love it. I see people using those crossouts. That's great. That's definitely very useful. You should be interacting with questions when you take the test. That's always good. All right. Most of you won't be changing your answers, but as soon as I see this, where does my mind go? Yes, plug points into equations, but also I'm lazy. So what choice am I starting with? You can bet it's going to be that 0, right? So what happens? In my head, I can just do, right? 0 plus 2 is 2 over 5, and negative 2 over 3? No, right? Those aren't equal to each other. Ugh, I need to make this pen so I can cross. So that's gone, right? And then laziness again, I'm going to the 2, but right away I'm like, okay, that's 4 over 5, and 2 minus 2 is 0, so that doesn't work. And then I want to avoid a negative if I can, so 10 over 5 equals 8 minus 2 is 6 over 3. 10 over 5, 6 over 3. In both cases, we're getting choice A working. That's both a 2. So there you go. So this is one where, again, I think because you guys are conditioned in school to constantly solve equations, many of you, your first thought as soon as you see it, without even realizing that you have a choice, you're just going to think, okay, these are equations I'm going to solve by cross multiplying, right? Let me multiply the left side by 3, the right side by 5, get rid of those fractions, and that would work. And again, the College Board explanation is going to tell you to do that. It's never going to tell you to guess and check, which is what we just did. It's never going to tell you to simply plug points into equations. The College Board explanations for the practice test questions, for the question bank questions, they're always going to be very textbook, very by the book. So we got to be careful with that. That's not what we really want to see. We wanted to learn new ways to do it. So that's why when you review things, whether it's a practice test or something from the question bank, I've got videos about all that stuff. Use that. It's all built in here. So use that. So that way you're getting that strategic approach. So a lot of people, especially if you're already scoring pretty high on the SAT math, they think that they need to focus on the hard questions. You might be looking at this and going, this is a waste of time. I don't need to do this. But I would say that the mistake a lot of people make is they assume that in order to improve their score, they need to focus on the questions they're getting wrong. But especially if your score is pretty high already, you want to make sure you're also focusing on the ones you're getting right and the ones you're getting right without any issue, because you might be able to shave off a couple seconds and save some time for those hard ones by doing the easy ones more efficiently. Or just on the easy ones, you're training your brain to use the strategy. So when the hard one comes along, you're in better shape. Here's a classic example of this, another one that we'll do. This is so great. This is a great example of how you can change your perspective, right? As soon as I see this, I see I've got some annoying algebra that I don't want to do. I want to plug points into equations. Now, do I have equations? Yeah, right? I mean, there's x's, right? That's basically an equation. And it says equivalent in the question, so that's pretty good. But if I don't have points, it seems like I'm stuck. I can't use the strategy. That's where we're going to use a version of plug points into equations that I call arithmetize. If we don't have points, and it doesn't seem like we're given any points, like on the last question, they gave us values of x, right? So we had some points to work with. Here we got nothing. If it doesn't matter what that x is, let's make it up. And let's make it really easy. Again, laziness isn't a bad thing on the SAT. 0 is a nice lazy number. And so in my head, I know that if I put 0 in for all these x's, I'm going to simplify these equations real fast, right? This becomes 3 times -2 times -5, right? Put a 0 in place of that x, and it wipes out that 5x. Put a 0 in place of that 2, it wipes out that 2. So we're left with just those pieces. And I might write that on the scratch paper if I've got my pencil handy, but even still, -2 times -5 is 10. 3 times 10 is 30. Now, if I do that in all the choices as well, right? Because if I make x 0, then all the x's are 0. All the x's in the choices are also 0. And look what happens. All those things that have x's attached are going to go away, meaning we're left with just the last bit, 10, -10, 30, -30. So I want 30. Choice C. That's it. So we could FOIL this out. I know that you guys, no matter what math level you're in, you've probably done hundreds, if not thousands of questions where you've had to FOIL out these kinds of things that look like this. And so again, your habit, your robot brain is programmed to just start doing that FOILing. And it's not so bad, but I want you to start thinking about this other way and really making a conscious effort to do that. And that's why when you do exercises for this next week, speed is not the priority. Do not worry about speed. Focus on trying these new things out, seeing how they work, getting a feel for them. You will learn a lot of places where there are more efficient ways to do things. If there's any questions on this, let me know. I know this is a little bit of a weird strategy. Arithmetize in particular is weird because you're never really doing this in school. Guess and check, maybe. Plug points and equations, maybe. But let me give you another one to work on while you guys kind of think about it. There we go. Clicking, clicking, clicking. Perfect. Now for this one, we have 2 letters. We have Q and we have X. Well, they're asking for Q. So the value of Q probably matters. But what about the value of X? Does that matter? Probably not. It's because otherwise we'd have no way of solving things. So that tells me I do have equations. Plug points into equations. I got those. I don't have points, but maybe I can make them up. So think about what X might be. Try it that way. See if you can make it work. And the key here is that they're equivalent, meaning they're telling you there's an equal sign between these things, even if they don't show it. Some of you might hit a little bit of a hurdle if you do exactly what we did last time. So if that's happening, x cannot be 0 because that would knock out the q that we want. But if x is 1, q sticks around. Also a lazy number. Keep working. I'm going to start showing my work here. So that way, if you are a little stuck, you can get a little bit of a boost. So x equals 1. So 4 times. Zoom out there. Let's do this. All right, so we got some answers here. I'm going to hit the button. Sorry if you're still working. I know it can be frustrating, the pace. I'll try to find the best pace possible. Ooh, I think someone just got it right at the buzzer. But there you go. So the work is still a little tedious, and there might be places where we can take a shortcut. But let me just show you clearly what we did, or what I did here, right? I put the 1 in for all these pieces, and because 1 is such a nice number, a lot of this just complexity goes away. And I would have written this on my scratch. In fact, on the SAT, my scratch would have looked exactly like it does here. This is not me just showing you stuff for the sake of showing it to you. I would do this. So I've got, putting a 1 here, I get 3 plus q plus 5 inside the parentheses. This becomes negative 12 times q plus 2. This other side of the equation just becomes 12 minus 84 plus 20, right? All those x's as 1s are really convenient. We just focus on the coefficients, the numbers in front. And then it just becomes solving a normal equation because we've got some q's, but everything else is just like combining like terms, right? So you saw I still did some very classic algebra moves. I distributed, I combined like terms, I showed my distribution, I showed my like terms. And that's because I know that, in the midst of a test, when I'm going fast, it's easy to lose a negative. It's easy to multiply something wrong. So A lot of people think that these little moves are stupid, but or childish, basic, but I still think that they're really important because I would hate to get everything else right and lose a negative somewhere and still get the question wrong. But if I do all this and it just continue the solving process, I do get an answer. At any point in this process here, we could have gone to Desmos and let it give us that vertical line and solve it for us, but I don't think I needed to do that. I was actually more worried about going to Desmos and losing something in the typing than I was just doing it by hand. But again, you'll find that balance of calculator and actual scratch paper work that you yourself feel most comfortable with and presents the most points. But if this is hard for you, I don't want you to feel like, oh my God, why aren't I getting this? This is a weird strategy. It's a weird way of thinking about things. But with practice, it'll get easier. And I was not expecting anyone to figure this out during this class. This class is meant to give you that preview, that sense of like what's important and what we want to do differently, so you can see a lot of these problems in action. But the work is going to really be done right here once you go and start seeing, okay, I've got a plug points into equations exercise that I can work on. I've got an avoid algebra exercise I can work on that focuses on arithmetize, right? So those two things are going to get much easier if you do the practice with them. So don't worry if it's not quite feeling smooth just yet. It will get easier with practice, but you got to do the practice. So that's why this is organized this way. If you want to organize things differently, if you want to start to jump around to different topics, you can also sort by the topic itself, by grammar, let's say, or the strategies, kind of overall specific stuff. A lot of plug points into equations questions are what I consider XY plane, because we got points, we got equations, graph them in the XY plane. So you can do that stuff, but I think the best way to sort is this way. And this is how I'll be structuring the class. This is how I'll be structuring the lessons themselves, plus the homework. So I would say this is your best friend here. Cool. Going back to this, how are we doing on time? I'd like to get to reading. Any questions on this for now? Arithmetize. Okay, let's see. Do I want to do any more math? Mm, let's do one more math one. Let's do one that doesn't look quite like the others. Let's do this guy. Now, there are ways to do this algebraically, but I like to avoid algebra. If you give it a read, an artist modified a rectangle by increasing its length by 20% and decreasing its width by n%. These modifications decrease the area of the rectangle by 16%. Based on the artist's changes, what is the value then? Well, if you got some ideas, run with it. But if not, the first thing I notice is, well, in a way, this is a really easy question, right? It's geometry and it's geometry of a rectangle, right? Like that's about as basic as it gets. And many people don't know this, but the SAT and this website have the reference chart. So see how it says x squared right there? That opens the reference chart that you get on every single SAT with all the formulas. So for some reason, area of a rectangle wasn't coming to you, it's there. They give it to you. So don't forget that exists for every math question on the test. So you have access to the more easy stuff like this, but also the weird stuff that you wouldn't be expected to remember, like spheres and weird special right triangles. So all that's given. But if I want to do area of length times width, area is length times width, well, I've got an equation, right? I got it from the reference chart or my memory, but I don't have points because I don't have a length. I don't have a width. And so again, my plug points into equations brain is thinking, well, I'd love to have some points here. Do they matter? Can I make up points? Can I arithmetize on a question like this? So I'm hoping that's a little bit of a hint. I'll let you think about it for like 30 seconds and then I'll start hinting some more. One thing I would say is that, remember, a square is a rectangle. So if you're looking for an easy starting point, squares are nice. They count, right? Squares, all squares are rectangles, though not all rectangles are squares. So you do have that going for you. And since we're dealing with percents, what's nice numbers to work with for percents? Well, percent means out of 100. So how would I get an area of 100? How about a 10 by 10? Right? Doesn't say that. Doesn't say anywhere that the length or the width are the same, that the length is 10, that the width is 10. Doesn't say any of it. But I want to understand how this thing is changing. And it's very hard to understand a change if we don't have a starting point. They deliberately are leaving out the starting point. So let's make one up. Let's see what happens. This is, again, that idea that, even if you're unsure if this is going to work, when you're doing these first homework things, don't worry about it. Give it a shot. See what happens. You never know. Now it's just about following instructions. What does it say? Length by 20%. So increasing, yeah. And this one is decreasing by n%. Ooh, that's annoying. But this is not that annoying. Decreasing 100 by any percent is very convenient. Very convenient. We got all the information, just following the instructions. Now we got our numbers to get a new area, a new length, and we can get the width. How? Well, plug points into equations. You're going to hear me say that again and again. Take another 30 seconds. And if you've got no idea, I'm just curious, feel free to just pick a letter that maybe feels right. I'm curious if anything jumps out as like, that just seems right. Even if you're not proving it with all this math, sometimes intuition can lead us in a direction. But I do want to make sure I got time for the reading. All right. Well, a lot of people, before I give the correct answer, are going to say, okay, well, we increased the length by 20% and decreased the area by 16. So I don't know, they do like a 16 plus 20 somehow, get something like that. But we should sense when a question is difficult. And that's too easy of a solution. I don't even know why that would work, but it just feels like, okay, at least it's something. But instead, all you got to do is say, all right, if the area is equal to the length times the width, and we have the length is 12 in this new situation, do some division, and we get that the width is 7. So how do we get from 10 to 7? What kind of percent is that? Well, that's a difference of 3, right? And 3 out of 10 is 30%. So choice C is the answer. Now, there are other ways to do it. There's algebra ways. They work, and there are some formulas that at some point we'll go over for the percentage things, because percents on the SAT are a place where we have a lot of traps. We know they're messing with us. You know, they love to use percentages against us because we're not very good at having an intuitive grasp of percentages. We're just really bad at it. So percentage questions in the SAT, we got to be really careful we're doing it in the right way. There are formulas that we'll use in lots of cases. Here, if we pick the right numbers, we don't really need the formulas, but the key is that we pick the numbers. And that's so weird, because if this were school, your teacher would be like, no, you got to do the algebra. You got to prove it with some sort of equation. I don't care. The SAT doesn't care. There's no extra credit for doing it the right way. There's only credit for getting it right or getting no credit for getting it wrong. So we want to make sure we're doing whatever we can to maximize the correct answers. And that's why I keep saying, for a lot of these cases, we're going to try to just take a chance on some strategies, take a chance on some ways of thinking. But if this was something that you didn't really understand, even if you did all this work and you felt like you weren't sure, remember, these are questions we'd want to bookmark. The bookmark lets you know that even if you get it right, you want to watch that video and review it, because maybe there's a better way to do it. So again, if you got this right using the algebra, that's awesome, but it's risky. Algebra is always riskier than arithmetic, because algebra has letters and numbers, but arithmetic only has numbers. So that's something to embrace. Even if you're an amazing math student in school, I promise you, you are worse at algebra than you think you are. And that will cost you points in the SAT. So a lot of this main strategy, this plug points into equations, is about reducing the amount of algebra we do, having numbers to work with. That is much, much better. So we're trying to get to that place as much as possible. Sometimes it doesn't work, but it's worth trying. Cool. Well, let's move on then to the reading section here. And let me give you a question that might seem intimidating. You can definitely ask more math questions if we got time at the end, but I don't want to completely monopolize that. So the reading, most people's least favorite part is the passages. That's my least favorite part. Plus, if the passage is long or 400 years old, that kind of scares us. And here is some Shakespeare. But I'll just preview here. Just like in math, we had a kind of very methodical strategy, right? We wanted to plug points into equations. That's going to work in all sorts of situations. We also want to do something very simple in reading. We want to think in a dumb way. So we're not going to read this Shakespeare the way you do in school. We're not going to read it the way we have to analyze every word and think about symbolism and double meaning and all that stuff. What was Shakespeare doing in 1590 when he wrote this play? I don't care. We're going to keep our summaries as dumb as possible. So your teacher wants you to know all the details. If you write an essay for a class in school, you're supposed to include as many details as possible. We want the opposite for the SAT, because we don't have the time to get all detailed, and the SAT is using details to get us confused. In the same way with some of those hard plug points into equations questions, they made it look scary, but it ended up being just plugging a point in. So we're thinking the same way here. And a lot of times, some of the dumbest ways we can think about things are in terms of connotations. Connotations. Basically, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? You know, something like that. And so a lot of times, especially if it's a poem or some literature where there's going to be a lot of adjectives, that might help us understand things. We don't need to understand every line, but if we get the vibe, the connotation, that might be enough. So I'll let you guys work on this one a little bit. Think about it. These choices are long and there are a lot of words in there, but I would say don't let that distract you. Try to think about what, in this case, Antonio is saying about his son Proteus. And don't reread. Once you get through it, go to those choices. Trust the process. When I see some bookmarks, some people you bookmark and that's good. Basically, with that bookmark thing, you want to think of it as, am I better than 95% confident I got it? That's one way to look at the bookmark. If not, then bookmark it. Another way is, did I prove my answer quickly and confidently? And prove is an important word in that, as we'll see. We want to have proof. Let's take another couple seconds, start to work it through. Finish or pick something if you've got it. And I'll give you the quick rundown of what I would see. First of all, I'm not intimidated if I see Shakespeare on the SAT. I actually like those questions more than some of the others because at least I know vibes, connotations might be enough to get it. So reading Pantino, he said that Proteus, your son, was meet and did request me to importune you to let him spend his time no more at home, which would be great impeachment to his age and having known no travel in his youth. Well, I don't know what half of that means, but I mean, I know what it means to have no travel and spend no more time at home. I get that too, right? So he seems like he wants to leave. Antonio, nor needest thou much importune me to that whereon this month I have been hammering. That is, I mean, barely English. I have considered well his loss of time and how he cannot be a perfect man. Okay, I get that. Not being tried and tutored in the world, experiences by industry achieved and perfected by the swift course of time. So what is Antonio suggesting about his situation, Proteus's situation? It's bad. It's negative, right? It's not great. So just from that, I would say let's see what we can do with these choices. I might not be able to get down to one answer, but if I just know I'm looking for like something that says it's bad, that might be enough to at least do some damage to the question. So A, Proteus's contentment with his sheltered domestic life has provided him with stability and grounding. That seems pretty positive. But what does Antonio think? Antonio worries, okay, that's negative. This foundation may not prepare him for the responsibilities he will face as an adult. So I like the end part, but the front part, contentment, stability, grounding, those seem pretty good. I could go back to this part about Proteus and what he was saying. Does he sound positive here? Does it seem like Proteus is positive and Antonio is sour on this? I don't know. Seems like he wants to get out, spend no more time at home. So he doesn't seem content. So just like that, there's a lot of words in this choice, but it's like two or three that matter. These are what I often call strong words, right? The words that kind of pop, that carry a lot of meaning. That's what we want to train ourselves to notice. And that really is the only way I can go through these Shakespearean lines is I can't read this as a sentence. I don't have some deep, crazy meaning about this. This is just a couple words that pop out as things I understand. So even when it is written in more normal English, we can still think about it that way. It's just like, what are the little pieces, the little fragments that matter most? So moving on to B, Proteus's resistance to leaving his comfortable home environment reflects his anxiety about facing the unknown challenges that Antonio argues are required for advancement into full maturity. So again, it sounds pretty negative there, right? Resistance, it sounds negative on both counts. But all right, I don't know, is it required for advancement into full maturity? That maybe seems a little strong. But if I were just going by connotations, I'd leave this. I wouldn't think about it too deeply. It seems to match the right kind of vibe. So I would keep it. And then Proteus's prolonged residence at home has created a deficiency in his development that prevents him from achieving the completeness that can only come through exposure to worldly trials. Well, again, this seems pretty bad, right? It's preventing him from being complete. So that seems pretty bad too, right? So that happens. And this is not a failure of the dumb summary in the same way that it's when we plug points into equations and multiple choices worked, it wasn't a failure of the strategy. It's just a thing we've got to deal with. Let's look at D and see where that takes us, and then we'll go from there. D, Proteus's eagerness to venture out into the world is met with reluctance by his father, who prefers that Proteus complete his education first. Well, reluctance is a negative word, but prefer, we're starting to get positive here. This sounds like he prefer the kid stay home, but I don't think so. It says he can't be a perfect man unless he's out in the world, right? So this is also like positive on the idea of staying home. That's not what we want either. So maybe we've got this ability to even break it down further into two people's opinions. And, that can help us eliminate some choices because these are long. But if I were to bound down to between B and C, I'm again looking for strong words. Proteus's resistance to leaving home, that's a pretty strong thing. That's a big claim. And again, we said it seems like he's requesting to be allowed to leave. So is that resistance to leaving his comfortable home? I don't think so. So the second part might be right, but the first part is not. And that's all ultimately what we're doing. Whereas here, C is what I would say is a weaker answer choice. Notice it's much more just about Antonio. It's not even really about Proteus's views at all. And that may seem like it's less of a summary, but it's actually what the SAT is doing in a lot of cases to make sure that we are going and noticing the right things. They know that when you do English class in school, you have to provide detail. Like I said, you're doing much more work on a passage like this in school, so you're used to providing details. So if your English teacher said, summarize these lines, and you just raised your hand and said they're negative, your teacher would laugh at you, yell at you, something bad, right? Like that is not, you can't write an entire essay and just say, this is negative. That doesn't fly in English class. But on the SAT, a lot of times it's going to be all we need. And so we start with this kind of dumber, simpler version of things to see what happens. And it might work. Sometimes there's only one negative answer choice, and that's that. But other times it at least, cuts out some garbage answer choices a little bit and helps us see more clearly the slight differences that might matter for the choices that remain. Plus, if you guys have taken an SAT already, mentally it's very tough to get through an SAT. It's only 2 hours and a little bit of change, but I take the SAT from time to time. I took the June SAT, and oh my God, halfway through that second reading module, I could feel my brain turning to mush. And it's because you're just using it so much. And we want to use it as little as possible, ironically. So with a dumb summary, it gives us permission to turn the dial down in our brain a little bit and try an easier approach and see how far that takes us, conserving energy, conserving our brain power for those times that it's really hard and we're going to need all that attention. So for me, just thinking about connotations is a great place to start. But let's take a look at another type of question and a lot of you bookmarked this and still got it right, and that's awesome. Yes, that's going to happen. But just to remind you, if you did bookmark this and got it right, you would want to make sure you would watch that video as you're practicing in the portal. Just make sure you take advantage of that opportunity to learn more. But let's do one that's a little easier on the brain. Let's do a vocab question. Because vocab questions also are very good for connotations, because a lot of words are just adjectives with a connotation, but also for understanding what's going to happen when the passages get longer. So let's do this one together. We're running a little short on time, and I want to just, if you feel like you got an answer ahead of me, go for it. But if I read this on the test, I already noticed, these words they've got some connotations here. But while critics initially dismissed composer Bela Plunker's latest symphony as uninspired, the popular response to her work has shown it to be anything but blank. So two things I noticed right away. While is an important word. It's a contrast word. So if we're starting by saying people said it's uninspired, and then we have some sort of contrast, feels like we want to say it's inspired, it's good, it's something good. The other thing I noticed is the colon. The colon allows us to repeat things, especially in these vocab questions. So we have, some idea before, it's going to, some idea, it's going to repeat that idea after. And especially when the blank is before, that means don't get crazy trying to fill in that blank. Just look at what's going on in the next choices, or in the next part of the sentence, and see what you got. So many have praised how the piece weaves together unexpected progressions and bold structures that challenge listeners' assumptions about classical music. So it does seem that this positive idea is coming up. So that seems like we should eliminate then the negative words. So if we go through the choices, we've got A, B, C, D. If you're having trouble categorizing a word, my advice is just, how would you feel if someone called you that word? How would you feel if someone said you're innovative? Probably good. Conventional? Probably not great. Haphazard? Maybe you know what that word means. You've probably heard it before. It's not a great word. Harmonious is positive. So, well, we got two positives, we got two negatives, so we're going to have to do a little bit more work. So what do we want in that blank? We want a positive. But I'm actually going to eliminate the positives. So what gives? Well, this is something the SAT loves to do as well. They know we're thinking about positives, negatives, connotations, all that stuff. They love to flip things around. That's why they have this contrast in the first place. This whole second piece is positive because that's contrasting with the uninspired negativity in the first part. But if we look at that whole piece, the popular response to her work has shown it to be anything but blank. They're flipping it again. So we do want a positive here, right? We do want that. But we have to recognize that they've given us a negative, anything but, right before the blank. And just like in math, two negatives make a positive. So we need a negative in that blank. I saw some of you got a little tricked by that. That's okay. This is something you're not used to looking out for, right? They're doing this on purpose. They're building this puzzle. But luckily for us, the dumb summary is just thinking in terms of connotations. It removes a lot of the complexity. It forces us to think about those shifts, those twists in the passage, and that really, really matter for getting this right. Because we might know all these words and have a complete, perfect understanding of what this passage is trying to say. But if we miss those kind of double negatives, we're in trouble. Now we need something more, and dumb summaries don't have to just be positive and negatives. We can get a little bit more smart, a little bit more specific. And especially with vocab questions, I love to fill in that blank with a very lazy word that seems to come from the passage. So I'm going to take advantage of that colon here. They're repeating themselves. What are some strong words? What are some words that stand out in that part after the colon? Many have praised how the piece weaves together unexpected progressions and bold structures that challenge listeners' assumptions about classical music. Those two words work together, right? So I'll just take the easier one. It seems like we're saying here that it's unexpected, right? And so I want something to mean that, right? It's anything but, well, here again, we got to be careful here. We want to say that it's unexpected, but there's a negative. So we want this blank to say that it's expected, right? This is the good idea. And we're saying that it's not, I'm messing up here. It's anything but expected because it's unexpected. Ooh, it's hard to say and not lose track of it, but that's what we're trying to do. And if we know the definitions of these words, conventional is a better word for something being expected, right? It's conventional, it's traditional, it's what we expect to happen. Haphazard means something like chaotic. So it's almost like the opposite of what we want. It's still negative, but if something's haphazard, it's happening without rhyme or reason. It's just jumping all over the place. So chaotic, for sure can maybe be a trap because it's what we maybe think is going on there, is what we think they're trying to say. And if we know we still want a negative, it's kind of like we kind of see the trap and also ignore the trap at the same time. That can definitely happen. So yes, the dumb summary is a great starting place. We might need to get more complex with it and start to think about the ways that they're playing with the connotations, the logic of the passage, things like that. I feel like we have time for one more. I should maybe ask, does anyone have questions? That might be a better thing if we've got only a couple minutes. If you do, feel free to interrupt. Let's do one more math one. Let's do this. Mm, let's do this. And then I'll sum up the reading and the math together. I think it's a good idea to end on. And the only thing I'll say here is, yeah, do your best, but also if you use that bookmark button if you think you need it. I'll be curious if you're confident in your answer, you don't need to bookmark, but I'll be curious. Some answers. All right. Okay. As a whole, we did pretty good here. So the answer is B. I thought more of you would get that wrong. Okay. That's not so bad. If you did get it wrong, don't worry about it. But I thought basically from our plug points into equations conversation before, a lot of you would just say, okay, the 100 pounds is the weight. So 100 pounds equals 80 plus 8t, right? So solve for t, right? How many weeks, right? To minus 80, we get 20 is equal to 8t, divide by 8, and goes in 2 point, what is it, 4 times or 5 times roughly. So, okay, 3, right? That's pretty darn close. It's about how many weeks, right? Like that's fine. But the problem is this isn't really the point that we want to plug in because W is the total weight he wants to bench. And they say he wants to increase the total weight he can bench by 100 pounds. He doesn't want a weight of 100 pounds. He wants to increase it. And what we have to recognize is there's a little bit of a kind of like point buried in this equation. Because if we think, even if we just do t equals 0, right? What's his weight now? How much is he benching right now? We would find that he's already benching 80, is it pounds? Yeah. So we could think of that as a y-intercept, lots of ways to think about it. But if he's already benching 80 and he wants to go to 100, we don't know that value of t, but we know that the actual value we want to plug in for W is 180. And that's the key. 180 equals 80 plus AT. Subtract the 80. 100 is AT. Divide by 8. And I guess you get some, I think it's 12.5. So you get close to 13. So there you go. Now, the reason I gave you guys that question is, again, I thought more of you would get it wrong. So I'm happy to be proven wrong. But I wanted to make one last point about the SAT before we close here, which is they're trying to trick you. And they're better at it than I am, obviously, but they are absolutely trying to trick you. And that's something that's also very different from the way your math teacher, your English teacher, any teacher really in school is trying to test you, right? Their tests in school are much more knowledge-based. You know the facts, you study the things, you're gonna do pretty well. Some of it is a little bit process-based, like algebra, things like that. We need to make sure we understand the process, but a lot of it is just, repetition and practice. You will improve, you will learn the facts and formulas and rules and everything you need to learn. And we'll do more of that next week. We're gonna hit the rules for grammar. We're gonna hit the rules for lines and quadratics, which we've seen a little bit of today. But those are the kinds of things that are much more traditional about the SAT. But it's this trickiness that's hard for a lot of people to understand. You're not used to like looking out for that stuff. And that again is why when you start to practice this week, start to think about that. Notice when maybe a question feels a little too easy. See if maybe you're just picking something because it feels right rather than actually doing the work of proving it. And that's really what this bookmarks quiz is all about, is to remind you that we want to, as much as possible, prove our answers. If we're just using logic, if we're just thinking it through, we're opening the door to a trap. We're taking a risk. And we might be right. Our logic might be right. But as much as possible, we want to back that logic up with some sort of proof. And so for the math, a lot of that comes down to putting numbers in those equations, even if we have to make them up, and seeing, can we see the equation work? Can we test it out in that way? So you'll see that in these exercises. You'll see exactly that. With the reading, a lot of it is going to come down to trying to understand the passage in its most fundamental way, the most simple relationship. We did a lot of connotations, but we'll do some more practice with this next time, seeing how some of the harder passages work as well, and other ways that we can create some slightly harder dumb summaries. But I should say too, you'll see that as well. So the homework for this week before next class would be to get through pretty much everything that's in this list, this strategies tab, the exercises here, are all going to be things that we've basically talked about. The grammar that we can talk more about next time, that's more of an overview strategy, but all this stuff is really good. The Desmo stuff we didn't get too much into, the vocabulary strategies we didn't get too much into, but that's what these classes are, is to help you understand how these things are going to work so that you can take more time and move at your own pace to get through some more questions with it. So you can always let me know if you have questions, certainly in these classes. You can also, like I said, use this website to chat me up. Feel free to reach out. There's also a piece at the bottom of every page that should let you report something on the site. So you can always let me know if something's not working. Also, take some time to input any scores. If you have official scores, I want to see those. I think that'd be really helpful for you to see them as well. If you have any practice test scores, that is also really useful for you to see so you can see your progression, and we can make sure we tailor the class to what all you guys need help on. Are there any questions or anything at all? I feel like it's been fairly quiet. Nice to see everyone. All right, well then, if you have no questions, you're free to go. I'll see you next time, the same time next week. But if you have other questions, feel free to stick around and ask privately. It was a good first class. If you have feedback, let me know. We'll move on to memorization next week. Awesome. Thanks, guys.